Hey guys, the Brick Canuck here. As you know, we got the new TLP servers coming up in May. One Veniki, which is starting in Gates of Discord, and the other, the one that I'm going to be playing on, and that's Yellowknack, which is going to be starting in Classic. So I thought something fun that I would like to do is kind of share with you what my own personal rankings are of each of the EverQuest classes as they are in Classic. Now, these are my own opinions and what I think about each class, so, as always, take it with a pinch of salt. And I'm a strong believer, and it's an old trope, but play the class that you enjoy playing. If you like being a rogue, do it. If you like being a druid, great. If you're an expert in charming and you're a top class enchanter, fantastic. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So I've made a very quick, rough and ready class ranking tier. Let me just pull it up. Alrighty, so here we go. So to start off with, we're going to be looking at the tanks. So the first tank we will look at is the Paladin. And the Paladin, you are the tank in a group that nobody wants. You're the tank that people get when there's no SKs or warrior in the LFG window. Or you're the tank that people get when it's the end of the night, the main tank's logged off, and it's 20 minutes before the group breaks up. So you get there, you do a few kills, and everybody goes to bed. That's the Paladin's role, unfortunately. And rightly or wrongly, they are probably the weakest of the tanks. And they do have some nice abilities to get aggro, and they're really good against undead. So if you're leveling up, I don't know, maybe in Unrest and Lower Guck where there's undead frogs, the Paladins do alright. They've got some anti-undead spells and whatnot, which helps them maintain aggro. And they also wield a super cool flaming sword, which, +1 just for that, to be honest. Very unique graphic for original EverQuest. And in raids, you're not the main tank, you are not the preferred off tank either. You are, and I'm only solely talking about Classic, you are going to be picking up a taunting before a mob does death touches, so you'd be really good at taking some death touches, which is a favoured mechanic in early EverQuest. And yeah, I think you get a pally res, you'll be able to do 0% resist, which can be useful in some fights if things are going wrong, to get people up fast, typically before they take another death touch. Combine that with the can't de-level perk, and that's pretty solid. But you are the weakest of the tanks. I'm going to put you in C. Alright. The next tank I'm going to look at is another one of the hybrids, the Shadow Knight, which is a warrior Necromancer. Really fun class to play. Have a lot of utility in groups, are really fast at getting aggro because they've got a snare which generates them a lot of damage in Clinging Darkness. They have a harm touch, so you can get mobs very quickly before someone tries to steal it. And generally, I think are accepted to be the best group tank for their ability to get aggro, as opposed to someone like the warrior, who in Classic EQ has one button they can press to get aggro in taunt. As a Shadow Knight, you have several different ways to do it, which are a lot more reliable than that taunt button, which always fails when you need it the most. In raid situations, typically Shadow Knights don't main tank. They can, and they can do fine, and certainly fine in Classic EverQuest. Shadow Knights are good. Warriors get better in that regard, but early on Shadow Knights are more than capable of main tanking in Classic EverQuest. So I think I'm going to put you up in S tier, our first S tier, and it's the Shadow Knight. Already, look at that on the board. And then we got our warrior. You think TBC, these are the the best tanks in the game. They're the pure tanks. They don't have any spells, and right, they don't. They have no spells. They have some abilities, and one of the only ways early on they've got of generating aggro is through the taunt button, which always has a tendency to fail. Like I said, they in group situations, you're going to get a group as a warrior easily. People always want tanks. It's part of the Trinity. Every group will need a tank, so you will be able to get groups, and you will level up. Are you better than a Shadow Knight in a group in Classic Everquest? No. In raids, you're typically the main tanks. You're the one that's going to be going head to head against these raid bosses, and you do very well at that. You do have things like Thea's Discipline, which can help against fear. Some of the mobs do, but I think for Classic EverQuest, personally, you're just behind the Shadow Knights. You're a good tank. I like you, but you're an A. So that's it for the tanks. Now I want to look at the healers. So, looking at the healers, we'll start with the Druids. Yeah, Druids. Yeah, a tough one. Tough one to place. You are can do pretty much everything, just not very well at anything early on. You do get more of an identity later in the game, but in Classic EverQuest, you're a very hard class to kind of say you excel in one area, because your heals are okay, you can heal, not as good as a cleric. You've got a few dots, but you don't dot as good as the shaman. You can snare, great, yep, you can slow mobs down and you can root them, that's good. You can cast Spirit of Wolf, I like it, and you can port, and I like that too. But in a group situation, every single time people will prefer a cleric because the cleric get res and you don't. So when things go wrong, where you got a druid as your main healer, you're gonna have to look for other options in terms of getting res, or you're running back. And in raid situations, again, your identity is a little unknown, really. No one really expects you to be topping the heal passes. You certainly won't be topping the damage passes, and your main role is pretty much to make sure your group stays alive, or if anyone's taking any damage when the tank goes down, maybe healing those and being there for those kind of spot heal situations. And of course, porting groups between the various raids on raid night, that's probably your primary function, as long with some buffs. I just think in Classic EverQuest, the class just really struggles to define what it is, and outside of sitting in Commons Tunnel selling ports, having said that, there is an upcoming change though for Druids, which may help them a little bit. The devs, it's on the test server right now, the devs have kind of shrunk down the database of different types of mobs, and that includes making more things, basically be animals in the game, and that includes spiders. So what that means as a druid is you can now charm spiders. And how this is useful in places like Sol B, there is a bunch of spiders there. I'm not too sure what level the druid charm goes up to in Classic, but that's an option. And then later on in the game, I think it's going to have more of an impact in Kunark and Velius, where you might be able to charm in Sebelis and Velx. That's probably it. That's probably going to be a huge advantage to druids. But the first druid charm, I think, is level 13. And that takes you up to be able to charm around level 20, 22, 24. So you're going to be able to charm in places like Unrest. You just grab one of those spiders, and again, you're going to be contributing more to a to your group. But yeah, again, it's limited. Charming as a druid is risky because you don't have things like Mez or as available to you as an Enchanter does. So yeah, still a D. Alright, next up we have the Shaman. Shaman's a very popular class and kind of similar to the Druid in that they're a versatile class. They can do a lot of different things, but unlike the Druid, they just do it better. They've got dots which are good. Not as good as Necros, but they're not far off. and they have heals, not as good as clerics, but they're they're solid heals. They got buffs, which are HP buffs, which stack with clerics, and they bring a lot more in terms of utility to a group because they have slow, and slow means your tanks are taking less damage. The mob's swinging less often, it's taking less damage, which is great, because that means you need less mana for heals. So a lot of groups will always want a shaman. The problem with shamans is that a lot of people box them, and they don't box them very well. So there are some good boxes out there who can do it, but most of the time you're not getting the full utility of a shaman in a group if it's being boxed. Another problem is the buffs are all kind of single cast right now, which means you're going to be casting them a lot. So for that reason, I think they're in A in Classic Everquest. That may change in Kunat, but Classic Everquest, it's an A. And then we have clerics. Clerics, the out and out healer. That's the best thing they do is heals. They get complete heal. What more do I need to say? It's a long cast, but it always completes heals your charm pets. It always completes heals your tank. They have some great buffs as well, HP and AC, and they can res. Right, you are the healer that everybody wants in your group. If you play a healer, it's almost like playing, I don't know, on easy mode, because you put LFG on and guarantee you'll get about 50 tells in the space of 2 minutes. You will always get a group as a cleric. Everybody always wants you. But the problem with clerics, and there's two, in my opinion, in Classic Everquest, the buffs, which again are all single targets, so you're going to be pressing them a lot. And the second is on raid, you are typically complete heal chains, which isn't very interesting. You just wait for your number to come up and then you're pressing a button to complete heal. And then if things go wrong, you have to res. It's very time consuming and it's a lot of work because you have to manually cast it. You can't just click your epic because that's not in the game yet. So for that reason, I'm going to put clerics in A. Controversial. Alrighty, next up we're going to look at the melee damage dealers. So to start with, we're going to look at the Bard. Bards are a very common class in EverQuest. In groups, you are always wanted because you help with things like mana regen. You can help with slow, but the Bard slow is not very good. You can charm, but that's really limited both in terms of time and how much you can use it. You make for good pullers, but you don't have a lot of tools to manage that right now. You make groups run fast, so that's good. You give us HP regen, yep. And Bard DS can stack with all of them, and you can give us protection songs. So Bards kind of do everything. The downsides to Bards is they don't bring a lot of DPS, and often they're boxed. People call them melody boxes. They're just there to cast the spells, and they're not swinging any swords, they're not doing any damage. They're just helping others do more with things like the haste song and the so on, and the heal song. So they're aiding the group, but they're not contributing a lot. They're just there singing songs, right? And on raids, you always want a Bard to be with your healers and things like that, which isn't the most exciting because you're not involved in a fight, but you're not doing a lot of DPS anyway. And there's so many bad boxes out there. I think in Classic Everquest they don't again have that full identity just yet. I think that will come later on, and when they get more tools, and then when they get the Ancient Song, Ancient Lucias, which is not limited or restricted to group, it's like area of effect, they're a lot better. I'm going to put Bards in B. Monk. I really like monks. You've got fists, you don't need weapons. In fact, you probably shouldn't even have any weapons because you'll always do more damage early on with your fists until you get the play in the sky, either the dropped or the quested one. You're doing a lot of damage and you're not very geared dependent early on, because your fists are always your best weapon as you're leveling, pretty much. Every group will want you because you bring a lot of DPS and you're the best puller. You've got utility in terms of feign death, so when things go wrong you just hit that button and let the mobs reset, and that can help splitting mobs and splitting pulls, so you're not bringing 4 to your group that a bard or a ranger might bring. You're bringing 2, which is more manageable for a lot of groups. On raids, you're the raid puller, so you're always very active. It's a very active class, so if you want to play an active character that contributes a lot, be a monk. They do have some buttons to press. There's like 4 different variations of kick that you can use one at a time. Some are better than others. You've got a self-heal, which you can use, which is you should always be using because that keeps you in the fight. You're not having to run out quite as often, and you do get some really good disciplines. The issue mainly with monks is early on, all those abilities can be put onto one hotkey, so you only have to press one hotkey and you're doing really good DPS. So yes, it's an active class in groups. You are what's relied upon to keep the XP flowing because you're bringing the mobs to the group. So it's very active. If you like seeing the zone beyond just the camps, it's a good class to play. But definitely S tier in Classic for me. Rangers. I don't mind Rangers in Classic. The problem is like they're meant to be the bow and arrow class, except there's really nothing much for you to do with a bow and arrow early on. In fact, you shouldn't be using a bow and arrow early on because your weapons are just better. That does change later on, but we're talking about Classic here. You've got some great abilities to pull aggro with things like Flame Lick. You can cast Spirit of Wolf, and I like that. And you can snare, and I like that too. And you do get some nice buffs which are unique for Ranger, which you should be casting on melee and tanks, which is good. The problem I have with Rangers is, again, they just kind of lacking the class identity this early on in this beginning. When you get your bow and arrow, and we're going to use you on raids such as like Lady Nev in TLV, where you can constantly stay in because you can just range damage, you don't have to run in and out. Great, I love Rangers. You'll be topping passes on that fight. But in Classic Everquest, you're going to struggle to get the group because you're not like the highest DPS. You don't bring all that much utility to a group either. You're just kind of there to do damage, and you're not really noticed. And it's kind of similar in range. You won't be topping any passes. You can speed bump, which means if the tank goes down, you as a ranger can quickly get aggro and wait for the next tank to pick it up. You can take a few hits, but not many. That does change. You do get some abilities to help, but Classic Everquest, again, they're not in yet, and you're really good at taking death touches because of that ability to rip aggro. I just think to play one in Classic, for me, I'm going to be putting you in C. Finally, rogues. Everyone likes to dunk on rogues, and in Classic Everquest, probably with good reason. What do you bring to a group? You stab things in Classic Everquest, and you backstab things, and that's great. You're a pretty decent DPS at that, but you're not the best because you're constantly having to reposition, because in a group your mobs move around quite a lot and you need to be at the back to be doing the damage, and that's and if you're not doing your max DPS, you can't use half your abilities, so that's a struggle. In later in Kunark, people will need you to unlock doors, but a bard can do that too. And Bard's probably the better option to do that because you get their like speed, their invis song, and all that kind of good stuff. Whereas a rogue doesn't bring any of that like beneficial to a group. They're just pure damage. And in raids, you're not gonna be tanking, but you can do pretty well on DPS charts. Now, I think in Classic, you're down there with Druids. You can keep Druid company in D. Alrighty, the last group that we have is, let's not forget about them, it's our casters. So, we'll start with the Enchanter. What do you bring to a group, Enchanters? You bring Charm. 95% is why you're awesome, is because Charm, because you're bringing a DPS. It's the same with Raids as well. Not only that, you get some really cool utility, and you're casting Clarity on people, so they're getting mana back quicker. That's great. You can mez mob, so when the monk brings too many, or the ranger brings too many probably, you can mez them so they're not beating on your healer. You have a slow, it's not as good as the shaman slow, but it's a slow. Yeah, fantastic ability, fantastic all round. Really strong group characters. In raids, they're probably slightly lacking because they don't make a lot of damage outside of the charm pet, so they're not as active during like the encounter. You just need to make sure your pet is charmed. If it breaks, you're mezzing it and charming it again, and also keeping an eye on your other enchanters pets and making sure no one's like buffs fall off. Yeah, absolutely awesome class. I think it's wrong thing. I think for an enchanter, yeah, you can be up in S. Give me an S tier for me. Easy. Magicians. Back in the day I made a magician and I used to love it. Really strong pets. You're very, very solid leveling. And on TLP you're very solid leveling. The pets are OP. They do so much damage compared to what they used to do. They don't have that much utility though. They have in Classic they have their nukes. They have a DS which is solid, which is good, and it can help in power leveling, but not as good as a druid. You're going to be nuking. You're more involved in raids, but you don't have Call the Hero yet, and you don't have mod rods, which you become useful for. Problem with magicians is they become very box friendly, and that's a problem. Because people box them, pet attack, and stand up, cast a nuke, sit back down, and that's kind of it. That's all you get out of them. And again, until they get that utility, playing a magician, you're not the DPS that everybody typically wants in a group, but you're not bad either. You're better than a Necro. So I'm gonna put you in B. I like the magician. The Necro suffers a little bit in the group game, or suffers a lot in the group game, because Necros, as you know, build around dots. Dotting everything. The problem is on a TLP in a group game, the mobs do not live long enough. They're going down really quick, so your dots are not very mana efficient, they're not hitting very much damage. So you try to nuke instead, you got life taps, but they don't do anywhere near as much damage as say the wizard ones or even the magician ones do. So you're kind of limited, but you do have a really strong self mana regen. You're not a Necro until you die to that. That's just the truth. But in raids, in Classic, you're going to be doing really well. You're going to be up there near the top of the passes on a lot of those fights. Because the fights last longer, so you can use your dots to your full advantage. Really strong in raids for that. They have a pet as well. It's not as good as the mage, but the other class again, nobody wants you in a group really, unless maybe you're fighting undead where you can use your undead nukes. So lower Guk, you'll do alright for the most part. Because of that, I think you're a C. You're not up to the level as a magician. And finally, the wizard. Big nukes, and you can port. The glass cannons of EverQuest. So in a group situation, you're standing up nuking and you're sitting back down. Do it too soon, you'll pull aggro and you'll probably die because you've just got no health. Same situation in raids, over nuke and you'll be summoned and killed. But you can port, and that's good, so you can sit in the tunnel during off hours and make some money. You're the only people that can send people to open world hate and sky, so you can make a little bit of extra money over druids doing that. I don't think your ports are quite as good overall as druids. They're a bit more limited as to where you can go early on. And again, you don't get some of the things you become known for, like mana burn for a good while, and your ports are single target early on. And yeah, they're harder to work with. But you know, I like a wizard. You're really good at taking death touches in Plane of Sky. So you're not a D for that. I'll put you in C. Alright everyone. That is my class list for Classic Everquest. Do you agree with it? I have SK Monk Enchanters in S, Warrior, Shaman, Cleric in A, Bard, Magician in B, Paladin, Ranger, Necro, Wizard in C, and Druid and Rogue in D. Now this is only for Classic. I will revisit this before we come and do Kunark opens on Yellowknack. So as a reminder to everyone, Yellowknack comes out May 25th. I'm going to be playing on that server, not on Veniki. I am actually running a guild on Yellowknack as well. That I'll be playing in Pacific time zone, so if that matches you, you like raiding in Pacific hours or really late at night Eastern, then hit up our Discord link below. We'll be delighted to have you along. Other than that, you'll find my usual links below: Twitter, Discord, Patreon, all that kind of good stuff. I'm going to be ramping up the amount of videos I'm doing as we get closer to the TLP launch. So feel free to hit that like and subscribe, and the bell will let you know when new content comes out. And if you do that, you know, it's very much appreciated because it does help a lot. Other than that, I am the Brit Canuck, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.